Good morning my dear students, and I am glad to welcome you all to today's botany class. So what are we going to learn today? Today's topic is Kingdom Plantae. In chapter 2 in our previous classes we had been studying about various kingdoms, right? What all have you studied? You have studied about Kingdom Monera, Kingdom Protista, and also in our previous class we have studied about Kingdom Fungi, right? So those kingdoms all you must not have seen with your eye. Say for example, Kingdom Monera consists of bacteria, right? So these bacteria all usually you do not see with your eyes, but in today's class you are going to learn about Kingdom Plantae, which includes fully of plants. Plants mostly you see in your day-to-day life, right? So it's going to be interesting for you than the previous classes. So let's get started. So what are some of the common properties of Kingdom Plantae? So plants characteristics you know, right? So those characteristics we are going to list under the characteristics of the Kingdom Plantae. So Kingdom Plantae, as I told already, consists fully of what? It consists only of plants. So all the plants are put under the kingdom called as Kingdom Plantae, and animals are all put under the kingdom called as Kingdom Animalia. Clear? So what are the characteristics of plants? You know, plants are multicellular. What is multicellular? Multi means many. What is multicellular? Multi means many. Multi means it is many. What is uni? Uni means single. What is many in plants? There are many cells in the plants. Plants are made up of many cells or multiple cells. That's why it is called as multicellular. In bacteria you have studied that it is unicellular, right? Why unicellular? Because bacteria itself is made up of only one cell. The whole body is only one cell, but in plants you have many cells, so it is called as multicellular. So plants are multicellular. This is the first property, and the second property is they are autotrophic in nutrition. What is autotrophic? Auto means self. What is auto? Auto means it is self. What is self? Self means by itself. Itself will prepare its own food. Plants themselves will prepare their own food. They do not depend on other organisms for food, whereas human beings, we depend on other organisms for food, right? Either we eat the plants or we eat the animals for our food, right? So our body does not have any mechanism to synthesize its own food, but plants are self-producers, auto-producers, which can produce their own food. How do they produce their food? They have something called as chlorophyll. They have something called as chlorophyll, which is a special property in plants, and also some microorganisms also have this chlorophyll, but it is a unique characteristic feature of plants. What is this chlorophyll? You must have studied in your lower grades itself. Chlorophyll is a pigment. What is chlorophyll? It is a pigment, and this pigment is green in color. What is the color of the pigment? It is green in color, and this green color only gives the green color to the plants. Plants are mostly green in color, right? So why it is green in color? Because of the presence of a pigment called as chlorophyll pigment. That pigment is green in color. So since the plants have many pigments in them, the plants are also green in color. Okay, and this pigment chlorophyll helps in photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? Photo. What is photo? Photo means it is light. What is the meaning of photo? Photo means it is light. Photo means it is light. Synthesis. What is synthesis? Synthesis means production, producing something. Clear? So these plants, with the help of chlorophyll pigment and light, synthesize their own food, and that process is called as photosynthesis. Okay, so these are the basic characteristics of plants. What all have we studied? Kingdom Plantae includes fully of plants. Kingdom Plantae do not include microorganisms or animals. It includes only plants, and these plants are multicellular, that is they are made up of many cells, they are autotrophic in nutrition, they have chlorophyll pigment, and they synthesize their own food with the help of photosynthesis. Clear? So these are all the basic properties of plants. Next we will learn about the different types of plants. There are two different types of plants, namely flowering plants and non-flowering plants. Flowering plants and non-flowering plants. The name itself suggests that flowering plants means the plants which can produce flowers. Do all the plants produce flowers? No, right? Only some plants can produce flowers, some plants will not produce flowers, and those plants are called as non-flowering plants. Non-flowering plants do not produce flowers. Clear? Only flowering plants will produce flowers. So, about these two types of plants we are going to learn in detail in this class. The properties of flowering plants, the properties of non-flowering plants, or what all plants come under this group. You must be thinking now, right? So what are all non-flowering plants? Have I seen like that? You must be thinking now. So let's learn what plants all come under this group called non-flowering plants. There are three main groups which come under non-flowering plants. They include algae. The second group is mosses and liverworts. Mosses and liverworts belong to single group. Clear? And the third one is ferns. So, non-flowering plants are of three groups called. First one is algae. Second one is mosses and liverworts. And the third one is ferns. Clear? So, what are they? Algae, mosses and liverworts, and ferns. So, about the properties of these three we are going to learn first, and then we learn about the properties of flowering plants in this class. So, first about algae. See, these two are algae. Okay, this is called as Spirogyra and this is called as Chlamydomonas. What are these two? These two are algae. The name of this algae is Spirogyra. Spirogyra. And the name of this algae is Chlamydomonas. Chlamydomonas. So what are these two? These two are algae. What are their properties? What are the properties of these two algae? Okay. First property is algae is always aquatic. What is aquatic? Aquatic means those organisms which can live in water are called aquatic organisms. So always algae can live only in water. That's why the property is given as they are aquatic, and then they are undifferentiated. What is undifferentiation? Usually, like for human beings, all our body is well differentiated with different organs. Say for example, we have separate eyes, nose and mouth, everything for particular functions. Say for example, eyes for seeing, nose for smelling, like that all. But this plant body, that is the algae, is undifferentiated. Just the whole mass is called the thallus. This is a thallus and this is a thallus. See, can you differentiate any organs here? Much differentiation cannot be seen, right? So their plant body is undifferentiated. They are not differentiated properly, and the whole mass structure is called as thallus. So this term is important. You should memorize this term. What is the name of the plant body of algae? It is called as thallus because it is not properly differentiated into parts like other higher plants. In other plants all you have proper root, stem and leaves, no? Here you do not have the absence of roots, stem and leaves. So this belongs to plant kingdom. Usually what we imagine, if there is a plant, it will be having roots, stem and leaves, all will be our imagination, right? But in this case, in the case of algae, can you see roots? Can you see leaves? Can you see stems? No, right? So this is just a thallus which do not have roots, stems or leaves. Clear? Then they do not have tissues also for conducting water. What are conducting tissues? You have studied about xylem and phloem, right? In your first chapter you have studied about xylem and phloem. What are they? They conduct water and food for the plants. That is also absent in the case of algae. Algae do not have conducting tissues called as xylem and phloem. So these are some of the properties of algae. What are all the properties of algae? It is always aquatic, which lives in water. Their body is not differentiated into roots, stem and leaves. They are undifferentiated. So it is called by the word thallus, and then they also do not have conducting tissues for conducting the water, absence of tissues. So these are all some of the properties of algae. Next we learn about liverworts. So the first category is algae. The second group includes liverworts and mosses. Do you remember the second group is liverworts and mosses? We learn the properties of liverworts separately and then about the mosses, because liverworts have special characteristics or properties and mosses have special characteristics. Though they belong to the same group, both of them have different properties. So we are going to learn in different slides. So see, this is the picture of liverworts. How does it appear? It appears like leaves, right? Does it appear like a plant? It doesn't appear like a whole plant. It just appears, the whole plant itself will appear like leaf only. When you see the plant, just the leaves you can see, okay, because their thallus is leaf shaped, leaf like structure. And also it is called by the name thallus because every time when a plant body is undifferentiated, which means if it is not properly differentiated into roots, stem and leaves, if it is found as one single structure, then you have to use this word thallus. Here also you can see only leaf like plant body, you cannot see proper stem, you cannot see roots. That is why it is called by the word thallus. But in this case the thallus is leaf like. What is the shape of thallus in liverworts? It is leaf like. This is important, you should keep in mind. Clear? And the thallus is found on the ground. See, it is just spread on the ground. It doesn't have a stem, so it cannot come above the ground level. Just it remains spreaded on the ground. So the thallus remains on the surface of the ground, and below the ground you have root like structure. It is actually not the root, but however it resembles like the root, and it is called by the word rhizoid. So rhizoids are like the roots. Inside the ground you have root like structure, that is underground you have root like structure, but it is not exactly the root. So that root like structure is called by the word rhizoids, which is below the ground. So above the ground you have leaf like structure, which is called thallus, and below the ground you have root like structure, which is called the rhizoids. An example is Mercantia. Okay, example of the plant for the group called as liverwort is Mercantia. There are many examples, but in your book Mercantia is given. So you have to keep this word also in mind. So what have we studied about liverworts? Liverworts are leaf-like structure, and that leaf-like structure is called by the word thallus, and the thallus is always on the surface of the ground, and below the ground you have root like structures which are called as rhizoids. Example for liverworts is Mercantia. So that is all about liverworts. Next we will be learning about mosses. So the second group includes mosses and liverworts. No? So liverworts we have studied. So the next slide will be about mosses. See, these are mosses. Have you seen these structures? Where have you seen? Maybe if you have wells or even on your compound walls, during rainy season, you can see such structure like spongy or velvet like structure you must have seen. Have you seen this? Such structure on the walls or inside the wells, on the surface of the walls of the wells also you can see such a structure. So these are called the mosses, but when you see the clear structure it is like this. So totally together if you see it is like this, but one plant if you take and if you put under a microscope and see clearly, the structure will be like this. Clear? So we will study about the properties of mosses. So mosses are very small. See, individual plants are very small in nature. It is not bigger like the liverworts. It is very small and it is velvety. When you see itself, it appears like a velvet and very soft nature, right? So it is called velvety nature, and it is terrestrial. What is terrestrial? Terrestrial means always it is found only on the land or above the ground area. It is not under the water. It is not aquatic. It is always above the ground level. That's why it is called as terrestrial. It lives on the land area. And where in land area? In damp area. Which is damp area? Wet places are called damp places. Clear? Wherever you have moisture. That's why I told during rainy season and also inside the well you have lots of moisture or humidity. No, always it is damp or wet in nature. That's why in those places all you can see these mosses, and also they have root like, stem like and leaf like structure. Actually in this group also there is no proper root, stem or leaves, but see you can see leaf like structure, you can see stem like structure all. No, that's why it is used by the word leaf like, stem like and root like. Clear? They appear like a stem, but it is actually not the stem because it does not have the properties of the stem. Usually stem should conduct water and root should conduct water. No, see, they do not have conducting tissues, so they can also not carry the food and water just like the other higher plants. That's why it is called stem like. It appears, see, exactly if you see it will appear like a stem only, but it is not called by the word stem because they do not have the properties or functions of the stem. Okay, so they have rhizoids which is root like, and as I told you before, they do not have any conducting tissues. So what are the properties of mosses? Mosses are usually very small and they appear like a velvet in nature, and always it is found on terrestrial land area. It is never found in underwater. Usually it is found only on damp area, which means it is found on wet places. Wherever there is wetness, you can find these mosses, and also they do not have a true leaf, stem or roots, just the structures addressed like root like, which is rhizoids, stem like and leaf like structures these mosses have. So this is about the second group. So the first group algae we have studied, the second group liverworts and mosses also we have completed. So what is left behind? The third group is about ferns, right? Ferns is common in Kanyakumari district, so most of you must have seen the ferns, and mostly in wedding bouquet all when they make, no, they decorate with the ferns. For decoration mainly it is used. So these the properties of ferns we will be learning now. So ferns are also terrestrial. Terrestrial, as I told you before, what is terrestrial? Terrestrial means they live on the land but they never live under the water. On the land or above the ground level always they live. So it is called as terrestrial plants. And then they have a conducting tissues. The remaining two groups what we have studied, that is the algae as well as the liverworts and mosses, will lack conducting tissues, right? They do not have proper conducting tissues for conducting water, but ferns have conducting tissues. They can conduct water just like the higher plants. They have proper roots, stems and leaves. The previous two groups did not have true root, stem or leaves, no, whereas here ferns have good conducting tissues as well as they have proper roots, stems and leaves just like the higher plants. So because they have conducting tissues, they can transport food and water just like the developed plants or higher plants. Clear? So what are the properties of ferns? Ferns are always terrestrial in nature. They have conducting tissues, so they can also carry food and water. Also they have a proper roots, stems and leaves just like the other higher plants. So these are all about the properties of ferns. So with this we have studied about the properties of non-flowering plants. All the non-flowering plants characteristics we have studied. So what is left behind? The one left behind is about flowering plants. So these flowering plants you call by the word flowering plants because they produce seeds or flowers. Flowering plants have two special properties. One is they can produce flowers as well as they can produce seeds. Clear? These flowering plants itself are of two types called as cone bearing plants and flower bearing plants. What are the two types of flowering plants? Cone bearing plants and flower bearing plants. What does this suggest? This tells you that flowering plants always need not produce flowers. Even those plants which produce cones, I'll show you what is cone. See, this is cone. You must have seen somewhere, right? So these are called cones. So these plants also come under the group called as flowering plants. Can you see flowers? They do not produce flowers, they only produce cones. But however, this group is also placed under the category called as flowering plants. So though they do not produce flowers, they are put into the group called flowering plants. So flowering plants generally produce flowers. Sometimes they may not produce flowers. Instead of that they may produce cones, but all of them will produce seeds. So they are also called by a technical term called as angiosperms. All the flowering plants are put into the group called as angiosperms. So angiosperms will have two types of plants called as cone bearing plants and flower bearing plants. So in our next two slides we are going to learn the properties of cone bearing plants and the properties of flower bearing plants. So as I told you before, both the categories, that is the cone bearing plants as well as the flower bearing plants, will have a special property of producing seeds. See, there is a cone and inside the cone you can see seeds, right? Can you see seeds here? These are seeds. So cone bearing plants have a special property of producing seeds, and also as I told you before, cone bearing plants are the plants which produce cones instead of flowers. Instead of flowers you will have cones in the plants. So this is the unique property of cone bearing plants, and then they produce seeds generally on the surface. Which is the surface? So this is the outer surface, right? So here usually you can find seeds. However, in some cases when you open the cone also you can you can see seeds inside. So mostly the cones have seeds on their surface, but sometimes it is also present on the inside of the cone. However, cones will definitely have seeds in them. Clear? So what are the properties we have studied? Cone bearing plants produce cones instead of flowers, and also they have seeds either on their surface, mostly on their surface, but sometimes it is also present inside the cones. And they are evergreen. What does this mean? Evergreen means they have leaves, right? Their leaves do not shed at all. What is shedding? Shedding means withering down. See, every time the new leaves develop in a plant, the old leaves fall down, right? If you have a garden, daily you can collect so much of leaves in your garden, because leaves every time they wither down, and after drying they fall down, right? After a certain period they fall down. But the leaves of cone bearing plants are evergreen. They are never shed down or they never fall down. This is a special property of cone bearing plants. They are evergreen in nature. They are usually very tall trees. These cone bearing plants are very tall in nature, and you cannot find any fruits in them. Can you find fruits? Have you seen fruits in cone bearing plants? No, you can see only the cones and seeds, but never fruits. Clear? And then examples are given. 3 examples are given: cycas, pine and fir. So what are the 3 examples given in your text for cone bearing plants? Cycas, pine and fir are examples for cone bearing plants. Clear? So this is all about cone bearing plants. So the last topic of today's class is about flowering plants, that is the plants which produce flowers. So this example what I have given you is a mango tree. See, there are mangoes here, and also can you see flowers? So usually flowering plants produce flowers. You can see flowers. Apart from that, they produce fruits. Can you see fruits? Yes, there are fruits, and also they produce seeds. Does mango have seeds in them? Yes, right? You have a single seed in the center of a mango, so you can sense that it has seeds also. So usually flowering plants produce flowers, fruits, as well as they have seeds in them. This is the first property. They may be dry or fleshy fruits. About dry and fleshy fruits, we have studied in a previous class that simple fruits are of 2 types, called as dry fruits like walnuts or fleshy fruits like mango. So the fruits in a flowering plant can either be a dry fruit or it can be a fleshy fruit, and the leaves are of deciduous type. What are deciduous? It is opposite to evergreen. In cone bearing plants, what did we study? The leaves are evergreen. They never shed down. Whereas in deciduous plants, the leaves will shed down seasonally. At particular seasons, they will fall down. In other seasons, it will develop new leaves. So the leaves of flowering plants are generally deciduous type. That is, they shed their leaves. And this group, the flowering plants or angiosperms, are largest among the plant kingdom, which means when you count all the number of plants in this world, many plants come under this group called as flowering plants, which means most of the plants in this world have the ability to produce flowers and seeds. So they belong to the largest group in the plant kingdom. Clear? And this largest group will have very small herbs as well as biggest trees. Clear? So everything comes under this group of flowering plants. Yeah, and also these flowering plants, this we have studied in your grade 6 itself. Plants are of 2 types, that is the flowering plants are of 2 types, which are called as dicotyledonous plants and monocotyledonous plants. What are dicotyledonous plants? They have 2 cotyledons, or that is why it is called dicot. Di means 2, right? And also a plant is called monocot when it has only 1 cotyledon. So these 2 groups are subgroups of the group called as flowering plants. Flowering plants may be either monocot or a dicot. Clear? So this is all about flowering and non-flowering plants for today's class. For your homework, in your next class, in your next botany class, you will be having an online test. That is, in your biology book you have to read pages 32 to 52. Okay, so read carefully. You will have an online test based on your understanding, and you have to remember the technical terms given in your book. Don't read like a story book. Memorize the important words are given in your textbook. So read thoroughly and prepare well for your test. So that is all for today's class. Until I meet you in your next class, you all take care and bye bye.